Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what we've decided to talk about tonight. So tonight we'll talk mostly about update on climate change, an update on climate change. Now Dirk has been on the show a couple times before, and that's why I've got him on again, because he's so charming and so brilliant, and sometimes he scares me. But anyhow,
Hi, Don.
Good to see you again.
It's good to be with you again.
And I see you got your glasses on again.
Well, yeah, actually I've gone a little different this time. These are actually not glasses, they're blinds that don't let any light through. I'm incredibly sensitive to the LED lights and the bright lights, so hopefully this will help. I apologize you can't see my eyes, but
I can read your mind, though.
there you go. I like it.
How are you feeling right now?
Excellent. How about you?
I'm nervous, and you're not nervous?
No, never. So why are you
Well,
nervous?
Because it's my makeup.
Ah,
Yeah.
very good.
I would go a little more into my psychiatric history, but I'll bore you with that, yeah. So tonight, we've talked about climate change before and a number of other things before, but we won't go into that anymore because we warned that out before. Not for you, because your mind is just incredible. It always impresses me how your mind works, and I can barely keep up with you, but just enough where I can follow a half a step behind.
Well, then I'll have to slow down.
So anyhow, as you know, the show goes, the first half or so is about who you are personally. And we've got this long bio here, and we can take up fully 3/4 of the hour with the bio, but we'll limit it because we want to get into an update on climate change. So let's go into the series of questions. You're familiar with my trick questions, so we'll start off with one of them, right? One of them. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Dirk? What would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Dirk is?
Oh, that would depend upon which of my many best friends it was.
Pick one.
It varies a lot. He's someone who cares a lot about people and cares a lot about knowing about pretty much everything. And
It shows.
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh. And what is his primary interest in life other than science?
Ooh, my primary interest for a long time now has been trying to understand how much more we are than this physical thing that is us.
And you making any progress?
Oh yeah. All kinds of interesting and strange things.
We've only got a 2-hour show this evening, so we can't keep going in that direction anymore.
Okay.
Okay. When and where were you born?
Ellensburg, Washington, 1955,
55.
Central Washington State.
Uh-huh.
Was only there for about a year, and then we were off into Yakima for a couple of years, and then mostly in the East Multnomah County here.
Uh-huh. So, why were you born?
That is a question actually I've thought a fair amount about, but not quite in that way. Mostly trying to understand what were the forces that came together that are me, that are you, that are all of us. How do we relate to one another? What's this all about? And in particular for this life, what's going on? What was this all about? And so there's some parts of it I could very clearly see as life went by, how in our family dynamic, how each of us was gaining, what lessons we were learning, though that's not really quite right, but what experiences we were having and how that helped us each grow individually and how it helped us collectively.
What is it all about?
That's something I still do not know the answer to.
Darn it, I got you.
But mostly I think it's about experiencing 3D reality, experiencing this. And I don't mean that just, physically, but also all of the emotional and other aspects of it. And coming to understand all of the things that are this reality and returning that to the greater whole.
So you've explored enough of all of the reality for you to have an answer?
Oh, no way. Toenail into the pool time.
How about anything about your racial, national, or cultural heritage?
Well, we've talked about this before.
Yes, we did.
I did a lot of genetic work to find out a lot of things about my physical body and all that. I ended up with arthritis when I was quite young and had it for over 30 years before I finally cured it, actually truly cured it, which the doctors have a hard time with. But in terms of the background, on my father's side, I'm an I1D star is the Y DNA, which is Viking. It's the founders of Sweden and Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
On my mom's side, it goes back into northern Spain, near the Basque, but not of them. And actually off the coast of England to a place that's called Doggerland, that's under the North Sea now.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of other things. A big part of my DNA, you can see, like a lot of Europeans, traces back to Central Siberia 45,000 years ago. And so you can follow that all the way over the eastern part of Siberia into the Americas, where I've got a pretty good relationship with the Clovis people from that route, and from them to Native Americans. So it's not the thing that I'm descendant of Native Americans, though there's a little of that. It's mostly that we share a common ancestor.
You need to do some work on your memory. You don't remember things too well. How about a religious preference? Do you have one now?
As we've talked before, I never have had a particular religion that I followed. I've thought a lot about that since you've asked it before, that mostly mine has to do with this exploration of who we are. And so there's a strange aspect that is not reincarnation, but it's kind of related to that, of splinters and fractions of who we are. A lot of things that would overlap a lot with a lot of different religions, but particularly with Buddhism and kind of Japanese Zen stuff, a lot of those. A fair amount that are common between all religions, but not a religion per se.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you ever embrace a particular religion when you were small?
Never did. When I was growing up, my folks were interesting. My dad and mom both, when they were younger, were given the same opportunity they gave me, which was, here's a whole bunch of different religions, you decide. And so I got to go to Sunday school and all kinds of other things and see what it was they were teaching and what it was they were doing and decide for myself what I believed.
But you never decided?
I did, but my decision wasn't to pick any of the existing religions. It was to find my own way.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And a lot of my science background was looking for truth, looking for reality as objectively as possible, but also not just that, beyond that. And so a lot of the exploration was figuring out what's really going on, what's this about, what does it mean?
Are you able to talk about your reality now in just a few minutes?
Go ahead, ask away.
Okay. And how about your education? My God. Talk a little bit about your education. There's tons of it here, and it's just incredible. What a mind.
Well, what it started as is, growing up in my house, my father was an instrumentation guy. When he was a young man, he went into the Air Force for a couple of years. When he came back, he was hanging drapes and delivering milk and doing carpentry, and he was looking around in the world to see what there was that was a good way to go. And so he ended up going to college for 1 year, and that really didn't work. And then he found this instrumentation school, Perry Technical Institute in Ellensburg, Washington, which it turned out is one of the most fabulous instrumentation schools in the world. And he ended up going there for a couple of years and became an instrument technician. He used that to become ultimately an engineer, control systems engineer, which is a very specialized field. And he was the head of the team. He was the chief pre-commissioning superintendent for the building of the gathering centers that pulled the oil off the North Slope of Alaska and pumped it down the Alaskan pipeline. Mm-hmm. This was a massive $15 billion project 30 years ago. So today it's much bigger than that. Well, I grew up with him at his elbow, and so we would talk long into the evenings.
Really?
And that was a lot of where my education came from, was with he and some of the guys that worked for him and other folks. We would talk about everything in great detail. Then later, when finally I came of the right age. I ended up going off to school, and I had to figure out where I was going. And originally what I wanted to do was go to Mars. I wanted to be the first person to set foot on Mars.
How long ago was that?
That began when I was, probably 4. Because already we had the space race going, and clearly I wasn't going to be the first guy to get to the moon, so the next place is Mars. Ultimately, that didn't work out. I did actually apply for shuttle. I made it through the first 3 rounds and then got a letter saying thank you, but no. I applied for mission specialist, and they sent me, about 2 weeks later, they sent me a letter saying, thank you, no, but you want to be a pilot? It's like, I can't, I'm blind. I've got 2300 vision. It's not going to work. So I ended up going a different direction. I went into engineering, became a chemical engineer, graduated out of Oregon State, chemical engineering with honors. And then promptly in a down market found that the 2 jobs I had offered, one was at a plutonium dioxide plant in Los Alamos. And I got to go through that plant. It was actually fascinating, a little disturbing. The guy who took me through had been there since day 1. And he was showing me all these very fascinating things, and particularly he would stop at places and describe a particular accident that happened and which of their scientists died there. And there were about 7 of those. We had one room that we walked into in the old plant, and we went in and were wearing these white smocks, booties, and a hair cover. And there's 2 guys in full acid suits with air packs and the full face mask, and you can hear them going and they're up on a ladder, and they're using an instrument and measuring a pipe. And it's like, what are you guys doing? And I tugged on his sleeve and asked that, what are they doing? He says, oh, nothing. After about the 3rd time, he said, well, they're trying to find, we've got a small leak in a plutonium nitrate transfer line, and they're trying to find it. It's like, this is the airspace we're breathing in. That wasn't good. So I decided not to go there, and instead, the other offer that I had, which I actually did quite well, I had 2 offers, about a third of our class had none. My other offer was with Westinghouse in Idaho to come and first learn and then train sailors to run nuclear submarines. And that sounded rather interesting, so I went and did it. This was Admiral Rickover's program.
Oh, yes.
Man, that was an incredible experience. Rickover, I got to meet him one time. He was quite a character. Oh, yeah.
Hyman Rickover.
Yeah, Admiral Hyman Rickover. When I was there, oh God, I hated the guy. I thought everything he did was unreasonable. About 5 years after I left there, I realized just how well he had nailed it. He's one of my absolute heroes. One of the things they do is they psychologically break you in the program. They never say that. I don't even think they think that themselves. But they want you to stop doing it your way and do it their way. And they do that very well. There's a saying in Idaho at naval reactors, the facilities there are all now closed, but at the 3 prototypes there, the saying was that a year there was like 10 years anywhere else, that you learned that much, you grew that much, and you aged that much. And I think it was literally true. It was a fascinating experience, but man, was it rugged. Yeah. They also say that for folks who go there, that if you are there for longer than 2 years, the companies in the area reference people from naval reactors as being permanently unretrainable. Once they're in Rickover's mold, that's it. You're done.
So it sounds like you've used your brain a lot in your life. So I'm wondering, how about another aspect of you? Psychologically or emotionally, are those kinds of tenderness to do with Buddhism and those kinds of things. I wonder, in your growing up, was there a lot of hugging going on between you and your dad, for example? And this is kind of stepping over the bounds.
No, it's fine. No, our family was quite close, and there was that. Though, as a kid, I remember when Star Trek first came on, and they had the character Spock.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to him in the first couple of shows. It's like, man, what an emotional basket case. Which gives you some idea where I was. But no, we were very open about everything. We had a very close family. The interesting part of that is, growing up, I did not realize it. There were things where a lot of the neighbor kids wanted to fight. This is typical for most people. And I wouldn't fight them. It was wrong. I knew that innately. I wasn't going to fight them back, which made me kind of the object of their abuse. Until finally one day, I'd finally had enough. There was about 20 of the neighbors that ganged up on me, and one of them managed to draw blood. And I came home, and my dad was home for some reason. We sat around the table and had a lovely chat about that. And I remember my dad finally asked, and my mom both, like, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And I went to the bathroom, cleaned up, and I came back, and I left. So it's like, what? And I left. Went around the corner and went to the neighbor's house where the leader of the gang was for the week, and I explained to him in his driveway how this was never going to happen again. And he promptly tried to take a swing at me, and I ducked him and I punched him in the shoulder. And he screamed and grabbed his arm. And then he tried to kick me. Well, I was playing soccer then in grade school. This about age 10 now. Anyway, he tried to kick me, so I whip kicked him inside the right thigh, and he screamed and fell down.
How'd you learn all of that at that tender age?
I looked at everybody else and said, all right, who's next? Nobody said anything. They all got quiet, and I left. That night, his mom came over and screamed bloody murder at my folks, threatening to sue us. I broke his arm. I broke his leg.
Wow.
They never decided they wanted to fight again. They found out I didn't fight because it was wrong. I didn't fight because I wasn't able to. That was an interesting thing. But what it was, a part of that was that it turns out I never had the emotion of anger. I never felt that. Up until the last couple of years, I've never felt it, which created interesting difficulties in my life.
Sure.
Likewise, I'd never experienced the emotion of shame. And what it turns out, as near as I can tell, the emotion of anger comes from being afraid for your own personal physical safety.
Of course.
If you can't feel or you don't feel fear of your own personal safety for whatever reason, you don't experience the emotion of anger. And not experiencing the emotion of anger, then you get another interesting thing is you become innately happy. And that creates difficulties. I remember going into work many mornings at different jobs and saying, good morning, and other people going, oh, what the hell's so good about it? It's like, I'm sorry?
What about an amygdalic effect?
Amygdalic, I don't know that word.
Amygdala.
Oh, amygdala.
That mediates between fight or flee, whatever.
Fight, flight, and freeze. The amygdala is interesting. Actually, I use it for an entirely different thing. Mm-hmm. There's a thing where the amygdala seems to act as a rocker between the forward mind, the high functions of the brain, and the primitive brain. And it seems you can only be in one or the other at a time. Mm-hmm. And so if you get into a condition where you are put in jeopardy, you go into the primitive mind and the thought processes are pretty much ruled out.
Absolutely.
Which you see that in society now a lot, where people will get into fear for whatever reason. They'll shift back into the primitive brain and respond with emotional response.
And there's no communication to the forebrain.
Not a lot, it doesn't seem. Uh-huh. It gets more complicated because the amygdala, there's one on each side, and there's two hemispheres. And what most people, I don't think, realize is that the two hemispheres of our brain are essentially two different people, mm-hmm. and they don't necessarily respond the same way. Matter of fact, in some cases, girlfriend of one of my roommates in college, it was interesting. It seemed that her left brain and her right brain really didn't like each other. And so she was constantly doing things that subverted herself. And it created an interesting dynamic with him as well, where, in one way they fought like cats and dogs, and another way they were absolutely all over each other, head over heels in love. It was very strange.
Yes.
But with the amygdala, one of the things that seems to happen, and where it goes into the world of the really strange that hard science folks really have a problem, is that if you can get right on the rocker's edge, between the back and the front, you can end up in a weird state where the power comes from the back of the mind, and the ability comes from the front, where you can end up affecting things in the world.
Actually affecting things in the world because
yes.
of your internal workings?
Yes. So as an example, doing some of the very strange stuff that we've talked about, this is deep meditative things. Yes. I came back from one program and didn't think anything about it, and about 2 days later I turned on my computer, and the computer squealed and smoke came out of both the monitor and the computer. And it's like, what? And I took it apart, and the CPU was fried and so was the monitor. Computer was destroyed.
And you did that?
Yeah. It turns out, yes. Over the next decade, I destroyed 11 more computers, just thinking at them. And what it was, if I'd get tweaked at the computer, the thing would squeal and things would go bad and the computer would die. It's like, oh, that's not good. That was a very expensive habit.
When did you get involved romantically?
Oh, that goes back to high school anyway.
Uh-huh. Did you get married then?
No, that wasn't until much later. That was, what, 19? I must have been in my early 30s. Yes.
And I've forgotten since our last interview, you got married and children?
No children. Was only married for a year. We were together for a couple of years, and that just didn't work out. The anger thing, it turned out it was a part of that I didn't understand then. I understand better, but not completely even now. There were things happening in the world that she wanted me to be angry with her about.
Yes.
I didn't feel it, and so I'm, in my logical mind, trying to solve the problem. Very much a guy thing as well. And that created all kinds of what to me were really interesting, intense discussions, and to her were fights. I didn't even recognize that at the time. Took a long time to figure that out.
Do you experience anger, feeling of anger?
Almost never. I've only experienced it a couple of times. I don't like it at all. I've only experienced rage 3 times, and I never want to go there. That's a terrible emotion.
And you appreciate intimacy?
Oh, absolutely. Love is the most important thing. Love and fear.
I'm shaking my head all over again. I never stop shaking my head with you, my friend. And I'm glad you're my friend. Ooh, I would not want to have you as an enemy. Yeah. So, you have any thoughts about a political persuasion? I know you don't embrace politics as, for me, it's a habit. I enjoy it. So you're not political, are you?
Well, in some ways, yes. In other ways, no. I grew up in the Oregon of Tom McCall, where we had Tom McCall, who was essentially our emblem of what the Republican Party was. Then we had others.
Those days are long gone, huh?
Those days are long gone. And then others that, there's a lot of different names on the left. And I pretty much agreed with both and disagreed with both. It was the time of the forest wars and all of that. And I probably tended more progressive than anything, and I still do. But back then we had a version of libertarian republicanism that's very different than anything today.
Yes.
That was Tom McCall, Oregon kind of perspective. Where you have things like McCall coming out of the newsroom fighting to clean up the Willamette River and restore fish runs to the river, which he managed to do in his career.
Sure.
And then also doing things like, you had the veterans coming to Portland, and you also had the anti-war folks, the hippies mostly, who were going to come and protest. And to try to stave that off, he sponsored a rock concert.
What was his political orientation? Was he governor?
He was governor.
Yes, okay.
And what was so funny about that, I was Oregon Scholar, and I got to go to the legislature for 3 weeks in my senior year. And one day I was wandering around the upstairs, heading somewhere. We were doing things like carrying actual physical bills from the legislature to the printer and back and that kind of thing, and also talking with a lot of the legislators. And it just happened I ran into Tom McCall outside his office, and he asked me how things are going, and I told him really well, and said, well, come on in, and we talked for 3 hours.
Really?
It's like, how often do you get to talk to the governor for 3 hours?
You are so weird.
That was kind of the beginning of that. But it was interesting that, as you come forward in time, you see all kinds of things where, in my career, the whole thing that we were doing was trying to understand what the entire perspective was of the population and to use that to defend and represent Oregonians in general and in specifics. But it wasn't about picking a particular belief. It was about figuring out what's real, what people are concerned about, and representing the public as best we could. Well, in doing that, one of the things that I did is it was clear early on that there was an advisory body going to have to be formed involved in the Hanford cleanup. And I got very involved in that as the federal government's beginning to try to set it up, and it was clear they were trying to lean it to something that they could control. And so, working with a lot of others, what we did is created a body that didn't do that at all. It was actually modeled after another Republican who was on KATU, who did a program on Sunday nights where they would talk about issues.
You got to say something, a few words about the Hanford cleanup.
So Hanford, for those who don't know, is the largest nuclear radioactive mess in the Western Hemisphere. It's a site in the middle of Washington State, sits on what today is about 250 square miles. Originally it was almost 1,000.
The Columbia River.
The Columbia River, just like the movie's name, the river runs through it. The Columbia River, it was the source of the cooling water and power to do a lot of things on the site. And so what they did is they built 8 production reactors. These were, except for one, none of the reactors produced power save one. All they did was take uranium, fission
Produce
it to produce plutonium. And after they would run the fuel for maybe 100 to 200 days, they would take the fuel out of the reactors, cool it down, and then dissolve it to separate out the plutonium. In the process, they made an enormous mess. That's Hanford. We could talk literally for months about that.
I know.
There are so many things there that are huge problems that people should know about.
What comes to mind right now is I mentioned you to Lloyd Morbett. There's another couple of hours.
Oh, yeah.
He's a delight. He's been on
Yes.
again since you were on.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to have him on for the second show this evening, which I didn't succeed in getting, which I don't have to have a second show this evening. And he was too busy, so he couldn't come on. So he's a regular of mine. And he's so delightful. He's a poet. He's so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see how you two became friends of some sort. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because you're both weird.
Well, yeah, and it's also a thing of, in working in that environment, I got to be friends with a whole lot of people from a lot of different perspectives, going back to the politics.
Sure.
The creation of the Hanford Advisory Board, the whole idea was, rather than focus on a thing about having everybody get together and decide what they wanted and vote and majority wins, which is American society, the idea was to have everybody get together and talk about things and find common ground, no matter how small it was, and grow that to as big as they could to where everybody agreed.
And there's always a common ground if you're available.
If you try. Yeah. That process works, but it absolutely, for legislators and others who came at various times to listen to the HAB, they were absolutely astounded at, the body coming to an agreement despite the huge diversity in political views, coming to agreement on really big things. And they would comment things like, we can't get 12 people to agree on lunch. How do you do this? Well, it's because of the way the process worked that anybody could say no. We don't speak unless everybody agrees. And that was the fundamental of the process. But then what it was is trying to get people to not do the polarized thing of fighting each other, instead find where we agree and grow that. Make it as big as you can.
Maybe one or two more political questions, because it's so topical nowadays for good reason, I believe, because of the way the system is going in this country based on what's going on in Washington. And I don't want to corner you as to which side you're on. My question is Trump going to finish this term, and is he going to win his next term?
I can't imagine how, within our system of government, he is still in office. It doesn't make any sense. If you looked at any president in history who would say the things that he said, he wouldn't be there. If you look at what the historians already are rating, if you look at the ratings of presidents, he's the last one already. And usually presidents have a bump where they like him in the near term and then they go down. He's at the bottom of the heap, and so have been several of the last several presidents, which is astounding that we're living through this time.
So I know you said you don't get angry. Do you ever get scared?
Occasionally, and that actually, the scared leads to concern for physical self, which is what led to the anger.
Mm-hmm.
And the climate change topic is one of those. For a long time, I was caught in a place of, we have to fix this. And then getting to the point of realizing just how far down the road we are, that leads you into a very scary place. And then from there, you get into a place of realizing, yeah, we're beyond the edge.
Do you feel scared?
Not anymore. And it isn't because it isn't scary. It is. It's because if you see where we really are, there are limitations on what we can do. And so we need to do what we can do, but what we can do has serious limits to it. And it's important that we recognize where that is.
And you're slipping into the second half of the show before it's time. It's beautiful. So let's take a few minutes to gather our strength and my thinking ability back, and then we'll come back and okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And I hope you're enjoying Dirk as much as I am. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like Dirk here. And we're talking about, yes, I always forget, the update on climate change. And he's going to update us now on climate change because lots has been going on in recent years, and particularly with this administration in Washington. And I keep drifting back to politics, and I won't go there anymore. Okay.
You know that.
So, okay, we have some prompting questions so that you can guide me along to ask the proper questions, because off the top of my head, I would have a hard time talking with you. That's why I like these questions that you gave me to ask you. You ready?
Go.
Okay. We hear a lot about how much carbon we have put into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, CO2. What is equivalent carbon dioxide, CO2, and why is it important? Why is equivalent carbon dioxide, CO2, and why is it important? What does that mean?
So this is the first thing I wanted to make sure that people, I wanted to talk about, make sure people understood.
Yes.
Historically, there's been a lot of talk about burning carbon and fossil fuels, and focus on carbon dioxide, which is the end product that's normally put into the air.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's a big problem is carbon dioxide is a global warming gas. It acts like a big blanket reflecting heat energy back down to the ground. And that is what causes the Earth in general to warm up, which is climate, not weather, where you have all the short-term effects.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem is carbon dioxide isn't the only gas that causes warming. And for a long time, we talked about a lot of the global warming gases. That was a phrase you might have heard a lot. And these are things like the chlorofluorocarbons and related, which also cause the ozone hole. Well, those are truly warming gases, but one of the most potent ones is methane, one of the simplest of molecules. And it's produced in nature, it's existed forever, but we've put a lot of it into the air as we drill for natural gas and leak natural gas all over the place.
You're going to say something about the ozone hole?
So the ozone hole, when the industrial age really got underway, we had a big thing about producing chemicals that we could use as refrigerants. And these have interesting properties where the liquid both takes up and gives up a lot of heat as you convert it from liquid to gas and back. And it happens at about room temperature, under pressure, and so you can have things like refrigerator using Freon 14 or the other freons or refrigerants, where you get a very energy efficient transfer of heat where you can keep things cold or hot, whichever it is you need to do. And initially these things were chemically pretty much inert, and that's the way they were treated. Is it's a harmless, wonderfully inert gas. It's safe to use at home, it doesn't burn, all kinds of nice things. And it's not particularly directly toxic. Well, in using a lot of that, a lot of it was released out into the air. And it didn't take too very long, a couple of decades, before people realized these gases were trapping heat as well. And these were then identified as global warming gases. And then over the next many decades, there were efforts to reduce the amount of the first gases that were produced that were some of the worst, and to use other gases instead that didn't trap heat as effectively. And so there's been many, many changes, as people in your audience no doubt have had, of going from one car to the next car where it's using a different refrigerant. And originally you could go down to the auto store and you could get a canister of it and you could pump up your own refrigerant system.
So humans are trapping heat because of their behavior?
Very much. Now, the ozone hole, how that happened is it turned out these molecules, when high energy light from space comes in and hits the upper atmosphere, it rips things apart and produces ozone out of oxygen, where instead of having two molecules of oxygen, or two atoms of oxygen making a molecule, you have three. It also produces things called free radicals, where there's extra electrons and very active components. And what that was able to do was to react with these halocarbons and others and nitrogen compounds, and it created a thing where it consumed the ozone in the high atmosphere. Well, the ozone does a second thing for us, in addition to some other things that it does, in that it stops ultraviolet light coming in through the atmosphere. And when you have an ozone hole, the ultraviolet light gets through and it causes damages at the surface, cancers particularly. And so there was a huge effort to try to reduce the fluorocarbon gases to both reduce ozone problems, the ozone hole, as well as for global warming reasons. The focus today is on both still. Mostly people talk about the global warming part. And the ozone hole has mostly begun to close most of the time, but it's going to take a long time to finish.
Because of our behavior.
Because of our behavior and because of how long these gases persist in the atmosphere.
Okay.
But natural gas, which is the most powerful of these, is anywhere from 100 to 10 times as powerful as carbon dioxide as a warming gas, molecule for molecule. On average, in the short term, it's about 25 to 30 times as powerful. So that makes it count for more when it's released into the air.
Where does natural gas come from?
Natural gas is pumped out of the ground mostly. Some of it is produced by bacteria and other things that are digesting various different things in the world and releasing it as a byproduct. Most of the natural gas, though, occurs when you've had a very long time where oceanic plant material in particular, and animals, has gone to the seabed and then buried in the surface, and then all of that was covered up and put under intense pressure and heat for a long time. This is where oil and natural gas deposits mostly come from. If you took that same thing on land, you end up mostly with coal. So it's the subsea deposits that mostly created the natural gas and the liquid oils. And so one of the things we found was burning natural gas produces a lot of heat and a lot of energy. It's very easy to transport as a gas. It's a really fine fuel in a lot of different ways. Well, particularly now in the middle north of the United States, in North Dakota, South Dakota, in an area called the Baham, they're producing huge amounts of oil from tar sands. And this is kind of a mid-range thing where you have very thick, viscous, tar-like materials that if they heat them up with steam, they can make that break down into a thick oil that they can pump, and they can then convert that into fuels for cars and such. In the process, they generate a lot of natural gas. And that natural gas, mostly they had no way to capture it and use it, so they just flared it. They released it to the atmosphere. In some cases, they'd burn it. In other cases, it would just leak. In California in particular, there's one place where they have huge natural gas use in Southern California, that they had a lot of the wells were just venting natural gas. They're leaking.
Yeah.
Huge inputs to the atmosphere. Well, when you do that, it creates this problem where the methane sticks around for a fairly long time, not as long as carbon dioxide, and it heats the atmosphere as it does it. Because of the way that heat bounces off the atmosphere in multiple layers, you can't just simply convert one number to another and add them. It doesn't work like that. You have to go through a very complex calculation. It's fascinating to learn what that calculation is and just how difficult it is. Anyway, when you do that, we're currently today globally at about 410 part per million of carbon dioxide. If you add in the methane and nitrous oxide and the other warming gases, we're currently at about 535 ppm equivalent of carbon dioxide when you include everything.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the last ice age, and in the early times before Industrial Revolution, so 1800s, we were at about 278, 280 part per million carbon dioxide in the air. And on about a 100,000 year period, it would go up and down about 100 part per million.
Sure.
But we were at the top, and that's when we began our Industrial Revolution and started releasing all kinds of carbon dioxide and methane and others. This is, you've heard of the hockey stick graph, where you look at carbon dioxide over a long time and then suddenly it rises right here in the near past.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the hockey stick that particularly the folks on the right get really upset about, because they're very much, their drive is about the economy and industry and commerce and all of that.
Making money.
Making money. And so if you try to inhibit that in any way, that's a negative. And so for them, the emission of carbon dioxide is a good thing, not a bad thing. But it has this other problem that it's changing the world rapidly underneath our feet.
Well, you got to make profit first. That's the first consideration.
Okay. Up to a point.
Yeah.
And then the point that comes around and gets you. So anyway, one of the things they started looking at is they started modeling the world and trying to figure out what would happen and looking into the deep, deep geologic past to figure out what already happened. Mm-hmm. What they could find was that we're currently, for the last several million years, in a weird stable position in the Earth's environment. Normally the Earth wants to oscillate between two conditions, either an icehouse Earth or a hothouse Earth, one or the other. Very rarely has it stopped in this middle ground, which is where we are today. And in the midground, what we have is ice on the poles, on Antarctica and in the Arctic Ocean. And the rest of the world has got all kinds of weather, and it's doing interesting things, and it supports life as we know it. But this is only a quasi-stable point. It's not entirely stable. And it's really easy to push it off balance and have it become one or the other. Well, if we push too hard on climate change, if we heat the world too far, we end up crossing what are called tipping points.
We meaning humans.
We humans. We can cross what are called tipping points.
Yeah.
And what they're referring to is, because this system is only sort of stable, if we push too hard and we change out of that, the Earth can suddenly rise 10 degrees centigrade on average in temperature, much more at the poles than at the equator. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different world that has no ice. Weather doesn't work in any way the same as it does in the Earth that we know today. And in the process, we end up killing off most of the species on Earth with the sudden shock in the changing of conditions. One of the questions is are humans one of those things that doesn't make it? And there's no answers to that. No one knows, because humans have only been around for a blink in the geologic record. The last time we had a really big pulse was back when the dinosaurs died, when the meteorite struck at Chicxulub in Mexico. And in that case, the meteorite destroyed a huge amount of the crust and threw hot rock up into the air that rained down and started fires all over the Earth, and essentially wiped out most of the land animals in a period of about 45 minutes. Uh-huh. And the ocean animals in not much longer than that.
What extinction was that?
This is the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction.
Yeah.
This is the dinosaurs. If you go back farther, there's a couple of other big extinction events where the world is a wonderful place, but it has this problem that every now and again massive things happen that kill off a lot of the Earth. Yeah. This actually, for the Earth, turns out to be a great thing, because it spurs this great new explosion of new experiments in biology to fill all the niches. But for the creatures that were around when it happened, it's a bad day. Yeah. Everything comes to an end. Well, one of the big ones that they talk about as a big extinction event is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, mm-hmm. the PETM or PETM. Mm-hmm. The PETM was this unusual point in time where suddenly the temperature spiked and carbon dioxide spiked hugely. And it's been a subject of a lot of studies because nobody knew quite how that happened. And there are still a lot of questions about it today. What makes it important for us is we are now warming the world at a rate probably 30 times faster than happened during the PETM.
Are we approaching a final extinction?
Quite possibly. We are in what's referred to as the sixth great extinction event. Mm-hmm. Of the biggest of the extinction events in all of geologic history, we're already in the sixth one. We're killing off lots and lots of species very, very quickly. And given where things are going in terms of temperature rise over time, the very high probability is we're going to kill off most of the species on Earth. And it's not that we want to, it's because we didn't care enough to realize what was happening soon enough to stop it.
I see now why you appreciate, I lost my thought. Appreciate the final extinction because of reincarnation. Well,
sort of. That really has more to do about the now than in those kinds of time scales. And it has much more interesting and fascinating things, and we can talk about that another time. It's a fascinating subject.
Yes, yeah. Time. Oh man, we just started on your questions here. And I want to ask you again, who were your heroes in your life, that people you look up to or admired immensely?
Well, number 1 and 2 were my parents, absolutely going away. Probably number 3 was Admiral Rickover. I learned more not from him directly, but from what he created than just about anybody else. But then there's also folks like Nikola Tesla, a lot of folks that you would never have heard of before that, should be well known that aren't. Mostly crossing fields of science, but also includes folks like Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa particularly. There's a wide variety of people. Franklin, who is the unrecognized third in the discovery of DNA. There's just a lot of them. But then there's also from the political world.
Franklin, which Franklin? Benjamin?
No. This, I'm trying to remember her first name. It escapes me at the moment.
Okay, sure.
But she was amazing, and she was the one who actually figured out the structural part from X-ray of how the DNA worked. Okay. Unfortunately, she died before the Nobel Prize was awarded, and they don't award Nobel Prizes to dead people. And so she doesn't receive the notoriety that Watson and Crick do. And I can't remember their first names either. But she was actually, to me, more fascinating than the two of them.
Marie Curie?
Marie Curie was an interesting character. She's not in my list of heroes.
Okay.
One who I didn't expect would be is Carl Sagan. He's grown on me with time. Others like Malcolm X, who played a very strange, interesting, and convoluted role in our history. Martin Luther King, who was astounding. John Kennedy. There were so many of that time frame in the 1960s. Robert Kennedy.
Do you have any prejudices when you think about all those people that you're mentioning their names? Any prejudices that you're aware of, or any hitting? I'm looking to see if you've got one.
I never thought about that growing up, and yet at the same time, Oregon is this strange place where our minority population, other than Hispanic, is quite small. I remember when I was a teenager, one of my best friends was a black guy, and there were 4 of us that hung around, 3 in particular. But a friend of mine, Bob, was black. Another friend, Kim, was Korean. And I remember we would go out and go someplace, and I was underage at that time, but if we went to a bar or something, they wouldn't sell to them, but they'd sell to me, which was very strange. So I'd buy and give it to them. I wasn't interested. But I remember we went into North Portland one trip and up on Albina someplace back in the earlier days before it all changed. Mm-hmm. And we walked into this one bar, and I went in first, and as soon as I walked in, there was suddenly dead silence in the room. It's like, what? And that's when suddenly I heard Bob behind me saying, "It's okay, he's with me." Well, it turned out it was a black bar. And for the first time, I experienced racism not in the usual way, but inverted, which was very strange. I wasn't even aware that there was such a thing until then.
Did you get angry?
No, I was more stunned than anything.
Yeah.
I had another, well, anyway, there was another experience with some World War II vets that Bob had been to Vietnam and Cambodia, and he'd been a ranger. He had a Vietnamese colonel's jacket that had a couple of holes and rips in it. And one night I went across the street to get pizza from where we worked, and I walked in, and a couple of these World War II vets took great exception to the jacket I was wearing. Well, this is in the 1970s, and it was kind of viewed that I must be a hippie or something. And when they got pretty uppity about it, that's when I turned and explained to them, it's like, the colonel who owned this jacket is no longer with us. Do you want to join him? Suddenly I was their best friend. They completely changed their view. That isn't racism exactly, but like with today and a lot of what we have going on, there's shades of that today as well.
Sure.
There's ways to diffuse it, but it was just such a strange thing to have these strong opinions completely devoid of fact being expressed, and it didn't make any sense. Well, again, I grew up in an environment where I lived in a technical world and in technical subjects looking for truth. These things were out of the emotional world that I didn't know anything about. Sure. I just didn't experience them. So it was very strange.
You're strange.
I'll take that.
Let's see if we got
I'll own that.
Any more questions without by being spontaneous with you?
Well, I'll give you one more. I went to a talk, a science pub last week on climate change. Mm-hmm. There were 4 professors from Oregon State who were authors in the International Panel on Climate Change process. And so they were doing a presentation, and one of the graphs they presented showed what would be required in terms of energy reduction to keep the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is kind of one of the upper bounds of where the world stays as we know it now. Mm-hmm. 2.5 might be the upper end of that, but 1.5 is generally regarded as this is something we need to do. And what they showed was we needed to reduce fossil fuel energy use by 50% over the next decade. And so they're showing this graph that shows what has to happen, and then it goes negative as we try to pull things out of the air. Well, 50% reduction of fossil fuel in a decade, that's 5% a year on average. Little higher if you compound it and you do it the other way. Well, anyway, at 5% a year, mostly our economy runs based on fossil fuel, like 85%. And gross domestic product globally is pretty much determined by the fossil fuel use because that's our principal energy source. So if over a decade, you can't really convert that to renewables. You can try a lot, but you can't do all of it. Matter of fact, a huge part you can't. And so realistically, what they were talking about is a 5% per annum decline in GDP, in domestic growth, for a decade. Well, I was looking last night at what happened during the Great Depression, and it turns out the kind of decline they're talking about is worse than the Great Depression, only this would be global in order to meet that goal. Well, obviously we're not going to go there, and that was my point in asking a question of them was, clearly what that calls for is collapse of civilization globally. That's not going to happen. What it says is we're not going to make 1.5 degrees. We're going to make some higher level. And it's going to require an all hands on deck doing everything we can even to do that. But we don't have the political will today to even begin doing that, particularly with the administration that's in D.C. now. If anything, they're going the other direction.
Well, what you're saying now is really interesting and intriguing for me, and I'm not sure I want to hang around or be reincarnated to witness what's going on. Of course.
Well, that takes me to a joke, or sort of a joke I mentioned to my dad when I was a kid. We would talk long into the evenings on all kinds of subjects, and somehow we got around to something related to this, and I remember half-heartedly suggesting it's like, well, I couldn't be here for the beginning. It'd be kind of nice to be around for the end. Yeah, I regret that now.
Yeah, well, we've still got a few minutes left. And
so one of the other things that's happening right now, there was a story here last week about doing direct air capture of carbon dioxide. And it gives you some idea of the problems that we have in the world in dealing with this subject. That one of the big companies had managed to succeed, or at least they think they've succeeded, in creating a facility that captures carbon dioxide from the air, which is one of the things required if we're going to keep the temperature down. And they could do that for what they said was $100 a ton. Okay. When you actually look at the process, though, what's required is it uses natural gas and other fossil fuels to heat the material that they're using to 900 degrees centigrade in order to capture the carbon dioxide to take it out of the air. The whole focus of their system was on cost, not actually on the total energy that was, or the total carbon dioxide that was captured. Because the carbon dioxide they captured, a ton, they actually burned a lot in producing that ton.
Yes, I was waiting for that.
And so there's this problem that so long as they're caught in this idea of using money as the gauge of what things are, which is our society, that they don't look at the energy return on investment and the other energy loops to understand, will this actually work? Now, if fossil fuel prices increase, which they would, under a lot of the systems where you do cap and trade and other things, if we're going to stop people from using it, one of the ideas is to tax it in effect so that people use less. Well, if we do that, then instead of being $100 a ton, it might be $200 a ton. And so constantly the affordability of this would run away from you always being unaffordable. You have to think of it in different terms in order to be able to solve the problem, which right now we don't seem to be able to do.
What's your forecast for what's going to be happening before we die? Is things going to get dangerously worse? Or are they going to start moderating some, or diminishing?
So one of the big discussions right now is how quickly will the Arctic ice melt away?
Yes.
And if you look at it, there are 3 different measures. One measure is how far out does it go? That's extent. And originally that and area were pretty much the same thing. And the difference had to do with the ragged edge. Well, now that most of the ice is melted, you get places where the Arctic ice sheet will shatter in the summer, and extent and area become quite different things. Well, a lot of the folks working on the problem focus on is the extent number. The area number is more important, but it turns out there's a third one even more important yet, is the ice has thickness. That thickness has been thinning pretty quickly. And so the volume of the ice that is there seems to be the controlling parameter. If you look at the curves of how that behaves over time, you can try looking at it as being linear, and it isn't. You can try looking using several different curves, and it isn't any of those. And it has a lot of noise in it, so it's hard to figure out which one you may be looking at. One of the ones that appears to be the closest is a simple curve, which suggests that we may, on the low end, see the first ice-free period of a day or more in the Arctic within about 5 years.
So can you finish that off with another sentence or so? Because the time is running out.
Sure. So the point there is, if we actually see a period where there's no ice, then the sun heats the ocean and it makes it harder to refreeze. Very quickly we get caught into a loop where the warming causes more warming, causes more warming, causes more warming, and it can run away from us. And that's the scariest thing.
And talking about running away, my viewers are going to run away from me if we don't stop talking. So
Okay.
look at that camera and say what you want to, this camera over here with the lights
Got
on, and a final message to the viewers.
Despite how scary climate change is, our world is still what it is. And the most important thing is how we treat each other. It's all about love. And it's important that we not forget that as we try to find our way through what little we do understand about the whole thing and find answers for us all.
Thank you so much. Wow, 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 wow. So we have a PSA time here. We have one or two of those. Oh, I got to thank you for watching, and I'm so glad you were watching while Dirk and I were going bananas here, because he drives me nuts. He's so brilliant. And remember KFC. Don't forget KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. No, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too, and you too, and you too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.